Hi, I'm Jason Bass, and I'm one of the hosts for the Southern Entrepreneur Conference. This is James Russell Lingerfeld, and he would have been our MC. Because of coronavirus, we had to take this conference online, so we thought we'd create this little intro.
We asked the speakers to just tell their stories and sprinkle some wisdom along the way on how they accomplished their goals. And you can read about each of the speakers at southernerentrepreneur.org.
We'd like to thank our sponsors, BMW of South Atlanta, the EMC of Coweta and Fayette counties, and Jason Hunter Design. We hope you enjoy the conference.
So I born in California, grew up in North Florida. Uh, my parents split when I was little, but a big part of the reason why I started or I committed to doing the compassionate capitalist movement was because of an impact I had when my dad was passing and I was going through his memorabilia. So kind of starting at the end and then going back to the beginning. So, I had, at that particular point in time, this is probably about 6 years ago, 5 years ago, I was going through a tough time myself financially because of the recession. I've been running an angel investor group for about a decade. I've been running these pitch events every month for companies pitching to angels. I had done these giant conferences with 10, 20 companies pitching to venture capital, private equity, angel investors, investment banks, lenders, all kinds of people. And it was called the Southeast Private Equity Conference. And my angel group was the Network of Business Angels and Investors, which I came into. Life takes you down these long and winding roads, and you end up someplace and you look back and you have the benefit of hindsight to say, well, how did I get here? And as life was progressing, and I found myself, because I had to shutter the angel group, my particular investors weren't actively investing at that time. They had the money and the desire to, but during the recession, they were running their own companies, they were execs in companies, and they had to keep their own businesses going. So they just didn't have the time to do the due diligence that's required if you're an angel investor to make a reasonably sound investment. And so it just was, there was no point in continuing it. And at that time, there had been rumors and momentum to start the Jobs Act to happen, where they were going to remove the one major obstacle for entrepreneurs raising capital and getting access to the broader audience, which is general solicitation, right? Public companies are public because they solicit for investors. Private companies are private, and they're supposed to have a personal, private relationship with investors. And that's why angel investor groups always became the source for capital for startups, because you couldn't find the other people except for friends and family type investors, right? Which we can get into. And so at the time, I saw this was happening, and during the recession, when we were kind of leading into this, and I was trying to get these investors to realize the best way to have an impact on the economy and on your local community was to invest in startups, because that's where job creation comes from. That's where innovation comes from. That's where all of, anything that you think about, it's entrepreneurs, they can't get the money from the capital, or they don't have it in their own savings. They turn to other people to invest in them, or private lenders or individuals, silent partners, as some people call them, to get that business off the ground, right? So I had been promoting my conferences under my podcast. It was called Spec Talk Radio at the time. And I renamed it Compassionate Capitalist Podcast, because I had always had that as on my business card. And it had been sort of something I figured out when I took over the Angel Investor Group back after I first left IBM. When I was at IBM, my nickname was the deal maker, because I was bringing capital to companies that were bringing .coms or new innovation to market. And I was working with IBM to put those teams together, and thought I knew how the capital markets were. So I left to go help a company raise capital right at the beginning of .com, discovered this angel group, rebuilt it, right? And then we come into another recession. And so I had changed my podcast to the Compassionate Capitalist Podcast, trying to convince people to put money to work. It was so much money sitting on the sidelines put it to work in these entrepreneurs to help them grow the job base, right? And so when I'm out there with my dad and I'm going through this stuff, and he was ended up his life fairly wealthy, and I'm looking back through, and I knew that he had started his own business. He invented the 5-color process for being able to do screen prints on T-shirts that had more than 2 colors. At the time, you could only do 2, maybe 3 colors, and he did 5 and a 6-color process, and he had patented it. He invented this equipment, and as I unraveled that story and I realized his age at the time and how he had kind of come into that, right? He had started out doing something that he was passionate about, which was skiing. He invented a game. He used screen printing to make the game. Then he started doing T-shirts, and then he was doing iron-on patches, and then he got this opportunity for this hamburger place that wanted a hamburger with all the colors on it. And he invented this, right? And that ran our manufacturer, which ultimately created the wealth that he had. And he didn't start that till he was 50 years old. Created, in effect, they call him the grandfather of the screen printing industry, right? He did something, he didn't think about his age. He did it because he was passionate about it. He led into his passion. He had knowledge about engineering because he was an aeronautical engineer. He had many, many steps that he had gone through trying to achieve, something, inventing things, right? And this had happened to do that. And so, with the combination of the work ethic that my mom had and what she had given to me and this vision of potential that I had from my dad, I said, I'm going to go do that. And then I went and wrote my book, and I'm on the journey that I'm on now. Okay, so when it comes to pitching to investors, when I do my workshops and stuff and I'm called in to speak, I tell people that there's 3 different types of presentations or pitches that you must create and master. Okay, there's the elevator pitch or the introduction, because there's sometimes where you have an opportunity, whether it's a BNI type of a meeting, or it's some kind of entrepreneur network meeting, or sometimes fast pitch events where you've got that elevator pitch, right? It's 90 seconds, 2 minutes, something like that. And so there's that. Then there's the typical angel investor network pitch, which is 6 minutes. And then there's the one when you get into talking to in a smaller group where you might have a 10 to 15 minute pitch that becomes interactive. So you have to be able to deliver all of them. But the first and foremost in all of that is that you have to know what your value proposition is, right? The value proposition of what value do you bring to the marketplace, number one, because that establishes your worth in the marketplace and the potential for what you have. But then the value proposition that you have to the investor, because you have to remember, I kind of call it in a nutshell, it's a beauty contest. When you have people that are angel investors or people that are in the business of investing, they are looking at lots of deals. And so they're looking at your deal over this other deal. They have options. When they have that kind of liquidity, they have options. So they could buy a franchise. They can invest in a franchise. They could go invest in an apartment complex. They could go invest in your deal. So when they have options, what is it that you're going to do for them? There's the financial piece of it, and then there's the passion piece, which is where compassionate capitalism comes from, right? Capitalist is making money. Compassion says, I'm going to choose to put my money into something that I'm passionate about, or I like the passion of that entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Right? And so you have to be able to establish that message so that it clicks in their brain. And so one of the ways I describe it is that you have, if you can imagine a sphere where you have a line in it, and there's above the line and below the line. And everybody, you probably have all heard about the conscious mind and the subconscious mind, right? So conscious mind is obviously what things that we're thinking about, we're present in, but subconscious actually drives a lot of our decision making. And so what you have when you're talking to potential investors is you have the above the line, which is the hope, right? That's the hope. They hope this is going to make money for them. They want it to make money, right? That's what most entrepreneurs focus on. It's the sizzle, right? It's the thing that's going to get them excited and want them to get involved. But then below the line is the fear of losing their money. There's also the fear of losing out, but it's fear. And so you have to be aware of what your circumstances are in your particular opportunity where you play in the marketplace so that you can overcome that fear so that they'll stay above the line. So for really seasoned investors, they've lost money on other deals. And they have this kind of hidden checklist of, I'm never doing that again, right? So what might that be? And then you have to understand kind of where you are in the marketplace, because sometimes, there's a lot of key innovation that makes you a market maker. But sometimes you're participating in the market along with a whole lot of other companies. If you're doing another app, how do you differentiate yourself from all the other apps? Mm-hmm. If you're a restaurant that's trying to get local investors or some kind of local business, how are you differentiating yourself in the marketplace from all the other ones that are doing that versus, and if you're something that's totally creating a new market, well, there's also the fear that you won't make it because people won't understand the value or even come to know you, right? So there's all a matter of how you're going to tell them that whatever way they're doing it now, your way of doing it's better, and you're solving a problem they may not even realize they had. Yeah. The only decision you're trying to get when you're doing any form of a pitch to investors is to have another meeting. Okay, so where the elevator pitch falls into this is that in the first 90 seconds, that investor is going to determine if they're going to pay attention for the next 5 minutes or 9 minutes or whatever it is. So by perfecting your elevator pitch that you might use when you're networking and uncover a potential teammate or uncover a potential investor is the same thing you're going to use to get their attention to want to pay attention to the rest of your presentation. And at the end of that presentation, you want them to want to ask you questions or meet with you to get more information. It's all a matter of getting to the next meeting. So you're not trying to fire hose them with information and talk super fast or do this kind of stuff or any of those kind of things when it comes to pitching. You're trying to get them to want to engage with you. And so sometimes you may not be able to go into your full marketing strategy. You just have to hit the highlights. If you want to get more information about that, we encourage you to set an appointment. We'll follow up and we can go through all kinds of details of how we discovered who our competition is and how we're going to beat the competition and how we're going to convey the message to our customer. And so then they know that you've done the work. It's not that you're hitting highlights because you don't know what the details are. It's because you don't have time to cover the details in the limited time that you have for that presentation. A lot of times entrepreneurs will say, well, I'm creating this whole new thing and nobody else is doing this way, so I have no competition. Well, yeah, there's always competition. And the first time that you say that to an investor in a pitch or anything like that, they immediately shut down because they know you're an idiot. So when I decided to start the Compassionate Capitalist movement, right, really officially, I've been kind of doing it since the podcast, and then the Jobs Act changed, right? So I said, I realized that there was still no training. So when I was rebuilding my angel investor group back after the .com, and I taken it over from the founder, Jerry Martin, in 2005 timeframe. And so I said, well, there's got to be a book out there. He says, well, and I went and I looked and I read lots of books. I'd been to lots of seminars, and there really wasn't anything that specifically was how to be an angel investor. So I mapped out, what the content should be. I started writing it. I produced it as ebooks back when ebooks were PDFs that you sent as an email. Okay. And it was part of getting opting in. And so I had 1,500 angel investors or potential investors opt in through, Google AdWords and articles that we would write back then. And probably about 200 or 300 of them ended up being for sure investors that gave me profile information and would look at the deals that were coming through our network. And so that became a sort of a test and I would make people read it before they could start investing. And part of what I talk about in the book is, creating an investor thesis, right? And so and part of what I did as part of that was you had to go through and sit through a certain number of meetings, and you had to read this book, and you had to come up and learn about it before you started to become an angel investor. You had to get some sea legs, so to speak. There's one chapter 3, where I talk about, I compare it to getting married, right? So you have your introduction, then you have your first date, then you have courtship, and then you get married, right? And so how do you get introduced to deals, which to an entrepreneur is how do I get introduced to an investor? So I go through all the different options for that, and then there's the courtship or the first date, which is the pitch, right? Or the follow-up meeting after the pitch, going back to what I talked about where you're getting to the next meeting, right? So that's the beginning. That's the first date where you sort of either you're initially pitching them or you're actually having your first meeting, which is different when you get into a crowdfunding space, right? And then you have your courtship, which is due diligence, and then you decide to seal the deal, and that's the marriage. You're signing contracts that say you're going to invest in this, and this is what you're going to get back for that investment. And so I kind of compare it to that so people would understand sort of the process that they are doing when they're dealing with these angel investors. And when you get into the world of crowdfunding, it changes because you don't have the benefit of a face-to-face. You have to still establish that same level of trust and the same comfort level, but it's a different process because you don't have the ability to sit down and convince them to trust you that you know what you're talking about, like you would in a traditional angel funnel. So part of what this book is for all those people that don't participate in angel investor networks, either because of time, they don't have time to get into it, they don't have time to go to all the meetings, or they geographically they're not, or they have small kids, they don't want to be out at night at these angel investor events. So how can they participate and be involved in this without being in an official angel investor network? Mm-hmm. So the book benefits those kind of people. It benefits entrepreneurs because they'll see some of these programs and ways that you can approach an investor to finance it, to do revenue cycle management on it, where they get paid out of the revenues and don't take equity, depending on what your exit strategy is. So yeah, there's definitely tips. It's written towards the investor, that's the audience, but entrepreneurs benefit from it. The tools that are part of the portal, definitely they benefit from it. And my next book that I'm working on now is specifically for entrepreneurs. Investors will benefit from it, but it's for scaling a business after you've gotten started and you want to go raise capital and you're an established business.